You made your views known, now trying to make sense of what it all means. And what happens now? Shaking up the ballet, the move to ditch racial stereotyping in the Nutcracker. Is the Chiefs chop next? We mark 100 days of Quinton Lucas in office and tracking women's periods in Missouri. It's making national news, but is there more to the story than meets the eye?
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes and thank you for joining us as we pour through the news of the week in this place we call home, dissecting the week's top local news stories. From the Tribune News Service, nationally syndicated columnist Mary Sanchez. From KMBC 9 News, chief political reporter Michael Mahoney. From the Shawnee Mission Post, Jay Center is back with us. And from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Is it now America's shortest-lived street name? 10 months after the Kansas City Council voted to rename the Paseo after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., voters have decided to change it back. 69% of voters saying they want to take down Dr. King's name and restore it to its original name, the Paseo. This was a lopsided victory. What message were voters sending, Michael Mahoney?
I think they were sending the message that they like the name of Paseo. They like it because it's a very Kansas City name, and those that are suggesting that there's a major racial component behind it are way off base.
They said it wasn't really about not wanting to have Dr. King's name in Kansas City, but this was more about the process by which this took place, Mary.
I think people will go to process when they disagree with what was occurring, but they had a valid argument in this case. And I do think it is, I agree with Mike, I mean, it's very unfair to frame this as some sort of racial thing, that this just proves how racist Kansas City is. I mean, the way the process played out, there's some issues, undercurrents of it, of who was heard first, how they were heard. But that gets into deeper issues with race and, you know, who has a voice at the table and process all along. You know, it started to go astray from the very beginning when they went to the Parks Board and were turned aside. And that really probably started this chain that went downhill then from there.
What percentage of the public actually went to the polls to even vote on this?
16%, right,
yeah.
Which was actually better turnout than I expected. Yeah. Typically, in an off-year election, no real big, candidate races on the ballot. You might get 8, 9, maybe 10%. So I think there was some interest in it. Let me just disagree gently with my colleagues. I don't think race was even close to the predominant factor, but when you lose 70 to 30, you do wonder if you had named that street for Robert Kennedy, whether there would have been that kind of rejection of it based on the Paseo. I think it was a combination of all those factors, process, the history, as Mike points out, and then I do think that there was some concern about whether we honored Dr. King too much. Remember, he died more than 50 years ago, and so his resonance for people of our age around this table may be less than for some other people in the public.
The thing about this is not that they dropped the King Boulevard name and renamed it Avenue G or Apple Lane or something like this. This was the Paseo, Kansas City's first boulevard, and that had a resonance with Kansas City. It's very Kansas City. It wasn't just dropping it for some anonymous name.
Less than 16% went to the polls, which means that 84% actually didn't bother to get off the sofa to actually register any opinion on this particular race. Jay Center, what actually happened in Johnson County? What was the percentage of the people who went to the polls in Johnson County?
The turnout was about the same. I mean, it was just under 17% in Johnson County. That sounds really, really low, but you look back to 4 years ago, the same election cycle, which was taking place in the spring back then, turnout was below 10%.
But there was like 71,000 people went to the polls, which I've seen now said that more people were at Arrowhead Stadium on Sunday to see the Chiefs than went to the polls in Johnson
Yeah, I mean,
County.
I don't think anybody's going to be cheering and suggesting this was like some victory for voter turnout and voter engagement. However, I mean, just putting it back against recent local elections, I mean, you saw almost a 100% increase in some cases. So
we're going to return to some of those races on the Kansas side in a moment, but a lot of people asking right now, what happens now in Kansas City? There has been a suggestion that there will be another petition drive launched to put King's name back.
You know, a week ago, I would have agreed with this. Now I'm not so sure, and here's why. In the lengthy statement that the head of the SCLC issued out late after the vote, Dr. Vernon Howard, he said, you know, this was democracy, so be it. Now, he was very unhappy with the result on this and also alleged that there was a racist foundation on the results. But that line, so be it, sort of suggests to me that it's not going to be a resurrection of the Paseo King Boulevard vote, but there's going to be something. And the mayor is indicating, rather than another commission, which we talked about around here a couple of weeks ago, he's going to ask the Parks Department and the new commissioners to take a lead.
When Sly James first looked at this when he was mayor, there was a task force set up that included our friend Eric Wesson from the Call newspaper on it. And their number one suggestion was not the Paseo, but to change the name of the airport. That the new airport terminal would be named after Martin Luther King. The second choice was 63rd Street. Is there an effort now to move any of those forward?
No, I do think there'll be a bit of a cooling off period, and then there'll be some discussion. There was pushback on the terminal idea. Some African-American leaders said, look, you're just naming the terminal, not the whole airport. That's second class. We don't want it. 63rd Street has been mentioned repeatedly as an option, but you don't see the people who live on 63rd Street really coming forward and saying, hey, we're willing to discuss this option, at least most of the people there. So I do think that what Mike's talking about, the mayor is trying to sort of corral this toward the Parks Board. There is an existing Martin Luther King Park. There's some thought that, boy, if we really enhance that park, that will satisfy.
Most people don't even know where that park is, though, Mary.
Absolutely, that's true. But here's the thing, too. You cannot make the argument that Kansas City has ignored Dr. Martin Luther King. We have for years had, and it has, this is one thing people could join in on, is the SCLC mass celebration. I mean, it goes on for a month, and it is not as vibrant as it used to be. But, you know, several years ago, when Reverend Fuzzy Thompson was still alive, and frankly, some of the leaders that have now passed, it was amazing. Thousands of people came out for multiple events. It was spread throughout the greater Kansas City region. That is a way to honor King, because so much of that really dealt with the depth of who he was.
And that event that Mary is describing here, especially on the night of the King holiday, was tremendous.
Now, there were literally hundreds of races on both sides of state line being decided this week at the ballot box, and there were some upsets. In Wyandotte County, Unified Government Commissioner Ann Murguia, who had designs at one time of being the mayor of the county, lost her seat to political newcomer Christian Ramirez. Also interestingly, in Wyandotte County, Randy Lopez becomes the first Latino to ever be elected to the Kansas City, Kansas School Board, which sounds remarkable given that more than half the district's students are Hispanic. In Johnson County, there were longtime members of the Water Board and the Overland Park City Council who were ousted at the ballot box. Complete this sentence for me, Jay Center. The biggest surprise of election 2019 was blank.
Was just how strong of an echo you saw from local election cycles in 2017 and 2018. You had this really large wave of first-time candidates, female candidates, who had served as volunteers on state house races, on Representative Sharice David's campaign. That was their kind of first step into politics. They said, I still want to keep getting more involved. They had a network of volunteers already built up from their experience on those things. Those candidates did extremely well on Tuesday, and I think it sets the stage for their involvement for years to come.
The biggest surprise for Dave Helling on Election Day?
Well, I think the success, Nick, and I think Jay is alluding to this, of outsiders, non-incumbents, and the challenges that incumbents saw, particularly in Johnson County, particularly on city councils, where under normal circumstances, incumbents almost always walk to victory because people recognize their names, and the challengers' names are not recognized. In this case, though, and I think there's a broader story across the country that reflects this, people are looking for new faces, new voices, new energy, and incumbency is not the advantage it once was. That, I think, is one of the biggest surprises.
The biggest surprise for you, Mary?
It's kind of almost the same thing. I mean, Ann lost, and I think, you know, she has a complicated history in many ways. We don't need to dredge any of that up. But I think it's demographics You know, I mean, baby boomers are aging out, and younger people are coming into their own. They, as Jay pointed out, they've been involved in campaigns at some grassroots levels, and this is the way democracy works. And then people move up, they get more stature, and then they go ahead and run. And we're seeing that play out, and it's great.
Mike.
Echoing on what Mary said, Ann Murguia's defeat in KCK raised a lot of eyebrows over there. I'm really interested, Jay, to ask you this question, and I thought your coverage on the local elections in Johnson County was superb, by the way. To what degree do you think questions about development and TIF were issues in the city council races in Overland Park and the other communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the top issue, frankly, and I think if you look at sort of like some of the big winners from Election Day, opponents of tax incentives looked at how things turned out on Tuesday and were very happy. In Overland Park in particular, you had two incumbents who were kind of status quo. We like the way the city's been using tax incentives. They both fell. An incumbent who's been a very sharp critic of tax incentives defeated a guy who was going to be more in line with kind of the status quo. And so I think developers in Johnson County are probably a little alarmed at the results from Tuesday.
So you've got some big winners and big losers there. What was your biggest winner and biggest loser,
Well, I think
Dave?
the biggest impact from Tuesday was the evidence that the petition process in Kansas City can be important. I think that there's been some discussion that maybe it's too easily used, but the fact is that the petitioners were able to get the Paseo name restored to that street, and they showed the power of the voter to sort of step forward, and that will be echoed as other controversial things come before the city council.
The biggest winner and loser for you, Mary Sanchez?
You know, I would have to go, you already mentioned him, but Randy Lopez. You know, he won by quite a bit, and a lot of people were really cheering him on.
So this is the guy who's now going to be the first Latino on the Kansas City Kansas School Board.
Absolutely. A lot of people were in support of him, and he's done his groundwork. I mean, I think I first met him years ago with the Latino Young Professionals Organization.
Michael, biggest winner and loser for you?
The Paseo vote on both ways on this. And to speak to Dave's point here for a second, because of the turnout in the mayor's race from this summer, the turnout was up, and the turnout and the threshold for petition qualification is based on the total turnout in the mayor's race. That number was really low after the second slide term where nobody voted. It's going to be higher and therefore more difficult to get a petition qualified down the line because of the turnout.
Were there any other bigger winner losers for you, Jay?
Well, you know, I think another kind of thread that's carried on from 2018 is that people aligned with moderate Republican factions in Johnson County have seen their support kind of dry up. You had a few candidates in there who had sort of status quo moderate Republican support who didn't perform very well. If you recall, after the 2018 election cycle, you kind of saw another hollowing out of the middle. Just kind of illustrates the realignment of party politics in Kansas right now.
What happened to that census issue? There was a statewide question. We talked about the Paseo. Did that pass?
It passed with pretty wide majority. Western part of the state, those counties did not like it, but pretty much everything Wichita and East was in favor.
Which makes sense why I saw those editorials knocking that vote in Western Kansas this week already. Well, today marks 100 days since Quinton Lucas was sworn in as the new mayor of Kansas City, Missouri.
I, Quinton Lucas,
do solemnly swear.
do solemnly swear
100 days may seem like an arbitrary number to some, but it's been widely used as an early indicator of how well our elected leaders are doing. By the way, according to History.com, no one talked about the importance of politicians' first 100 days until Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933. When it comes to our new mayor at 100 days, what has been his biggest accomplishment, Michael?
I think he will point to, and I will point to, his initiatives on gun control. He has taken a creative approach to basing some local ordinances on gun control based off federal law that's already there, with restricting guns from teens and now domestic abusers and subjects of restraining orders. It's a novel way to do it. He's going to do more, but he's going to cite other aspects of that code, specifically about guns in school zones, as well as guns and drug dealing. for a couple more ordinances we'll see
But
coming
in
down
the
the line.
same week, we had 3 murders and separate incidences in 5 hours.
Yeah, he's not going to suggest, or I don't think anybody can logically suggest that this is the panacea, this is the way out. Lucas believes it's a start, and some other communities around here, St. Joe, Independence, right off the top of the head, have looked at this teenage gun restriction from City Hall in Kansas City, and they're adopting it.
Biggest accomplishment of Quinton Lucas in his first 100 days, Mary?
I think there's a sense from voices that haven't had a voice at the table that now they're there, that they're being heard.
Like who?
The tenants group
yes.
is one thing. And you will start hearing the pushback. I mean, I even just last night started hearing from some landlords that they weren't aware of this effort. And so I think some people are going to start paying more attention and weighing in earlier. The Paseo was a little bit like that. There was a lot of the voices that were against the renaming who weren't even aware that they had held all those meetings. So maybe this will make people be more involved from the get-go, and then we'll avoid some of these
Dave,
negative.
I think his biggest success, and by the way, he's on a 100-day tour around the media. He's talking to all of us about it. So he's sort of set this yardstick. But I think his biggest success, Nick, has been to streamline the committee process. He cut down the number of committees at City Hall. They're meeting at different times so people can go to those committee sessions. He's asked for the resignations of members of lots of boards and commissions. I do think he's getting his arms around the idea that the work at City Hall is divided up and that those appointments and decisions are very important, and that they funnel up to the City Council, and I do think he has a pretty good grasp of that.
Jason, he's also working pretty heavily the Kansas side of state line, it seems. I saw photographs with him and Kevin Yoder, the former Kansas congressman, coming into his office offering advice. He's been having a friendship with Sharice Davids, meeting with the United States Senator from Kansas, Jerry Moran. How is he perceived on the Kansas side of state line? Are they seeing more cooperation with him?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's too surprising to see the new mayor coming in and trying to offer an olive branch to elected officials on the other side of the state line. He was a law school classmate of Sharice Davids, so they had an existing relationship. But I will say, in terms of actually where the rubber meets the road, what are the things we can do to collaborate? The historical antecedents suggested it's very difficult to actually have both sides of the state line work together on anything, so remains to be seen.
Real quick story about that as it relates to Lucas in Kansas. When Governor Kelly in Topeka signed the first indication that they were going to end the border war, I'm over there for that event, and I'm talking to the politicians inside of the Kelly administration and state legislators, and they are talking about Quinton Lucas like they're on the Kansas City, Missouri Chamber of Commerce, and it was stunning. And then a couple hours later, Lucas announces his element of the deal, but he's made an impression in Topeka as well.
Is there a red flag for Quinton Lucas after his first 100 days?
Well, yes, and we talked to him first of all, violent crime remains a scourge and a problem, and he seems to know that he'll be measured by it, so that's a problem. But also, he talked so much about incentives and subsidies and TIF, which Jay just talked about in Kansas City, and yet all the projects, Waddell and Reed, Bravo Hotel, Strata Office Building, USDA down on, down in the Quality Hill area, all of those are downtown projects, and he needs to get a feel for that a little bit better than he's had
But
so
he is
far.
limiting some of those incentives. I
He's
saw on the
trying to do that a
USDA
little
project that he wants to limit it now to about 1.6 million in incentives for that project.
I agree with Dave on this. He needs to put some evidence on the table that the economic development landscape is changing.
Now, we're offering you a chance to spend time, by the way, with the mayor as KCPT joins the Kansas City Library for Priced Out, a town hall on affordable housing. It's taking place Wednesday, November 20th. It's at the Plaza Library with a wine and cheese reception at 6, all free, and the program starts at 6:30. But please register. You can do so by clicking the events tab on our website at kcpt.org. The Kansas City Ballet is shaking things up with its biggest show, The Nutcracker. It's removing what some say are inappropriate portrayals of Asians during the Chinese dance. Ditched are the pointy rice paddy hats and Fu Manchu mustaches. Also gone are what's being described as outdated caricatures of how Chinese people move. It follows a Change.org petition pushing for the removal of yellowface from the holiday show. While those changes are being made, some asking, is the tomahawk chop next? A Kansas City Star editorial claims it's time for a new
Chiefs tradition, the divisive chant is the Star claims is racially insensitive and entirely unnecessary. Dave Helling, is there something happening behind the scenes that prompted this editorial, or is this just the view of the editorial board?
No, I think it was just our discussion. We began a discussion a couple of weeks ago about whether this was appropriate. Concerns about the tomahawk chop are not new. In fact, we used to write about it 7 or 8 years ago. It does seem to be more visible now because the Chiefs are playing better. It's on national television, and I think that was the focus.
Are you seeing Native American groups, though, protesting outside of Arrowhead Stadium?
No, they did years ago because there was an issue with headdresses, which is still an ongoing conversation. Look, the Chiefs have met with a group of tribal leaders for about 5 years now. It's ongoing conversations. They're still very much in conversation. Look for some changes maybe even later this year. They will honor Native people on December 1st. I think it's Oakland Raiders game. But the issues, have not been the chop, not for a long time. You will always find some disagreement. I mean, frankly, the last time I wrote about this extensively was when Jim Thorpe's son was in town with the Chiefs, with a lot of other tribal leaders. He didn't even, he kind of dissuaded me even because he didn't have an issue with it.
Good
But
yeah.
Okay, let me get Michael Mahoney's view there.
Yeah.
Mary, you walked me right into this. There was a Washington Post poll some time ago of Native Americans. Are you objectionable to this stuff with the Redskins, the Braves, the Cleveland Indians, the Chiefs? And overwhelmingly, they said no. However, it does raise some questions, and one of the reasons it's back in the news right now is because of the Atlanta Braves, and they do the tomahawk chop down there. There was a Native American pitcher on the Cardinals that objected to it, and the Atlanta fans tried to rub it in his face.
Now, this is an issue, by the way, that transcends our NFL team. These issues are playing out in our area schools. Jay Center, 2 years ago, there was a big effort to have Shawnee Mission North change its mascot from the Indians after a team in Lawrence said they didn't feel comfortable playing there. Did they make any changes in the Shawnee Mission School District?
They made some minor tweaks to the way that the mascot program was run. The headdress issue came up in their discussions. They decided that the male mascot would no longer wear a headdress. As they kind of defended the decision to keep the mascot, they said, we've never done the tomahawk chop, so we're trying to do this as respectfully as possible. The tomahawk chop in the Shawnee Mission School District was never an issue. Native American families at Shawnee Mission North pushed back on the district's decision to keep the mascot, said, listen, we don't think that our image, our visage should be used in a mascot in this way. I'd be kind of interested. There's been a change in the superintendent since then. I'd be sort of interested if it comes up again, if the decision remains the same.
Dave.
I do think, I wanted to say just briefly that I do think it's wise for us to visit this issue every once in a while to make sure that that the discussion doesn't go away, that we just don't say, okay, well, we consider this and threw it out the window and the chop is fine. I do think the people's opinions change over time, Nick.
Sure.
The Braves show that, the incident during the playoffs. It's a good discussion to have periodically.
It's a story making national news as the state of Missouri tracking women's periods.
Kansas City Star headlines don't always go national. Missouri health director kept spreadsheet of Planned Parenthood patients' periods.
And in the last column there, it includes the department's calculation of the woman's last normal period, right? Yes, sir.
All right, some are calling for Governor Mike Parson to fire his top health director amid reports he allegedly kept a spreadsheet to track the menstrual periods of women who visited the state's only remaining abortion clinic, and that's in St. Louis. Randall Williams says the issue is being totally misconstrued and the state was simply trying to collect evidence of botched abortions at the clinic. Can we put this into context, though? The state of Missouri is not randomly collecting information on women all across the state, and when they have their periods, you have to go to the specific clinic, right, in St. Louis. And isn't it also true that the names of patients were never attached to any of the information that was being looked at by state health officials?
That is all very true. And I think if you took it in this most extreme way, women didn't see it that way, though. Every woman knows that when you go to your doctor, you're generally asked, when was your last menstrual cycle? What we're not used to having is that information wind up in to what is basically a political argument, a culture war around abortion.
But I did see the state health department says that the Missouri law does require that doctors who perform abortions submit a report that includes that information.
Yeah, and that's the broader critique, which is that the state of Missouri is far too intrusive with the patients at this clinic and violate their privacy.
Okay, and let me just ask, I mean, are there any plans by Governor Parson to oust and remove the health director?
None that I know of, despite the fact that the optics on this politically are awful.
When you put together a program like this every week, it's hard to get to every local story making the news. What was the big story we missed?
Game over! Was it the Chiefs proving they can win without Mahomes? Broken promises or too soon to judge at KCI? The Black Chamber claims the new terminal's development team aren't meeting hiring goals for minorities and women.
This project is just not making the mark.
Could Kansas soon release hundreds of inmates to end prison overcrowding? Governor Kelly's new head of prisons says it's something to consider as Oklahoma makes the news for releasing 400 inmates in the largest single-day mass commutation in American history. Do people not want to ride the bus in Johnson County? County leaders eliminating bus routes, including a recently added one to the Prairie Fire development. They say they're not being used enough, and the move will save over $1 million. America's newest warship is the USS Kansas City, and it's ready to set sail. The combat vessel just completed sea trials and will be delivered to the Navy in a matter of weeks. As it might be just a little too big to be parked on the Missouri River, its home port will be San Diego. It's Veterans Day weekend, and all veterans and active duty military are getting free admission to the World War I Museum. It's half price for everyone through Monday. And it's now open. Celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay in town this week to open the doors on his new steakhouse at Harrah's Casino in North Kansas City.
Okay, did you select one of those options, Mary Sanchez, or something completely different?
I did not select one of those because you just ran through those and they're all wonderful and
Thank
they
you.
deserve it. I would say, you know what, I'm so glad that some of the TV stations in particular keep highlighting the naturalization ceremonies. There was another one this week. 60 people down at the Kansas City Public Library became U.S.
And
citizens.
as somebody who's naturalized myself, I understand the success of those events. Michael Mahoney.
As a naturalized citizen, I think they're great TV events. My story that we didn't get to here is the minority and women hiring issue out at KCI that is smoldering and will continue to smolder.
We will monitor that. Jay Center.
I thought it was kind of interesting to see the Republican candidates looking to challenge Sharice Davids next year, trading barbs over who had been more supportive of Donald Trump against the impeachment effort.
We're going to monitor that one too, Jay.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave.
And draw attention to my column named Lamar Hunt out at Arrowhead Stadium. That's what everyone will be talking about.
I'm saying they've got that much time on their hands to be talking about things like that over at the Kansas City Star. That is our Week in Review. Our thanks to this week's news reviewers from KMBC 9 News, Michael Mahoney, and from the Star, Dave Helling, nationally syndicated columnists for the Tribune News Service, Mary Sanchez, and Jay Center with the Shawnee Mission Post. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.